there's a lot there, right?
A lot there. And because it's a new prime minister, right, we don't know the answers that he's going to give the way you might when you've had a leader in power for 9 years. So a lot of what we're hearing is what's his take on this? We've not heard that before. A lot of what you highlighted, I highlighted as well. I do think it was interesting when he was asked about looking for support, overt support of Canada in the face of annexation threats. He did repeat what he said before, we don't need others to stand up for us. But just talking about how, well, there was the or more part of that question. There's economic force, and then there's actually the idea of some kind of physical attack, troops coming across the border. So he talked about how, as a member of NATO, in which there is the clause that, an attack on one is one for all, that it's unthinkable. The or more is unthinkable. So I mark that down as interesting, that even though there's talk about stand for ourselves, not wanting to go down that road when it comes to actual military incursion. He did show that he wasn't stumped by any question in any major way, except when it kind of came to the testy exchange on the disclosure of what his assets that are now been put, his investments and holdings, into a blind trust. I did feel like that moment got a little testy, where he blanket said following the rules and how could there possibly be a conflict of interest if I'm following the rules. I doubt that will end that conversation or that line of questioning, especially as we head into an election campaign. And just there was one other thing that I highlighted, Andrew. Just that in his answers, and a lot of people have said, what kind of election campaigner will he be? This is a prime minister who's never held office in terms of an elected position, very untested when it comes to campaigning. Definitely testing out lines there where you answer the question about how you would do something and then you attack the other side for how they wouldn't do it the way you would do it and why that's bad. He did that a number of times, singling out Pierre Poilievre, whether we're talking about the industrial carbon price and the system, and pointing out that you get rid of the industrial price, you're no longer going to have an easy free trade with European partners, which is why he's over there, to try and bolster trade. Something that he uses as an example of forward thinking as opposed to inward thinking. Just one other example of how we're all looking to see how Mark Carney does on the stage when faced with these questions. Yeah,
there's a couple of things. I guess when he talked a little bit about, and you're right, this is interesting for us, right? We're getting used to a new prime minister. We've had the same one for a while, and so we're trying to it's interesting to hear him. Doesn't matter the political stripes. Always interesting to hear someone new and trying to kind of figure it all out. But I think it was an interesting elaboration in this particular dispute with the United States. He did say it on Friday that the remarks this discussion needs to happen in a respectful environment. But he did say that these disrespectful, not helpful remarks, they have to stop before we can have a broader discussion with the United States to even begin. So it's interesting, a lot of people have been talking about, well, what about speaking with Donald Trump? We haven't heard from the U.S. president on Mark Carney. I don't think he's said anything, unless I missed it, maybe over the weekend.
And if so, I missed it as well. But he has, I do think that's how he's explaining not going to Washington first. And I think there'd be a lot of risk in a meeting in the Oval Office right now with the president for Canada. I mean, how that would all transpire if and probably when you have a president that brings up the whole 51st state thing, the prime minister is going to want to counter that. We all saw what happens in an Oval Office when you push back on something that the president says.
Vladimir Zelensky.
Exactly. So much better perhaps to just do the phone call for now, which we understand is in the works, but of course hasn't happened yet. Interesting that he talked again about how there needs to be respect for Canada's sovereignty before those real substantial talks happen.
The other one I wanted to get to, and we don't have to get too much into this, but just broadly speaking, I thought was some of the elaboration on the F-35 contract, if you want to get into that just a little bit. But it kind of comes in the broader context of saying, and he said, we have to deepen, we are too reliant on the United States in both a commercial trading relationship, but also in a security relationship. And so he's really seems to be opening the door to possibly buying European-made planes or planes made in Canada by a European plane maker.
At least after our initial purchase. I mean,
Right.
I think there is some concern that the penalties would be pretty high, and we're pretty far down the road in the initial contract for the initial buy for F-35s. But the interesting thing about the F-35 contract is it covers both the security and the trade aspects, right? So it's, we're talking U.S. plane and, security from sharing sort of the same kind of military hardware and plane as the U.S. That's a security sharing, and then of course also spending the money on buying it from a U.S. defense industry that covers both that. So it was interesting to hear him talk about, and I have it written down here, just that not only are we dependent on them for normal goods and services in terms of a trade relationship, but that part of his discussions with both Macron and Starmer, part of his whole reason for being there is to talk about possibly finding other military suppliers when it comes to Canadian goods. Now, maybe that won't actually cancel the initial buy of F-35s, but as he said, there's options once certain things have been ticked off to go in another direction and buy elsewhere. So that certainly is a file to watch. As is him when he talks about we don't have influence over American policy, and normally we don't anyway, but he sort of said we used to talk. And it's not just so much that now they're not talking, it's that we used to talk and there would be some sense that they would listen. I mean, obviously there's conflicts that we've had and irritants, but now there's the sense that, we could talk their ear off and it falls on deaf ears.
Karina, interesting day. Thank you. The CBC's Karina Roman, live in Ottawa.